A California 1984 cold case is finally solved, and the breakthrough has shocked Los Angeles County. The name that closes the circle is Erin Morales. The town that never forgot her is Ranlow Hills. The mechanism that snapped the chain is DNA, a fragile strand lifted from an apron in a cardboard box, fed to a genealogy tree, and walked up to a door in another state. The outcome is simple to say and heavy to carry. An arrest, a pair of handcuffs gleaming in morning light, a life divided into before and after. It begins on a Tuesday in early spring. The sun is still low. The desert air beyond the county line lies flat and cool, a thin hush before the heat comes up. Two unmarked sedans drift down a quiet street in Reno, Nevada. The block is modest and beige, gravel yards, chain-link fences. A wind chime ticks a single note and then decides against a second. Sprinklers arc like glass in the sun. The cars ease to a stop outside a tan ranch house with a low porch and a screen door that does not quite fit its frame. A porch chair sits at an angle to the world, the cushion bleached thin. The house smells like old coffee and laundry soap, and a yard that never had grass to cut. Two detectives step out. One is tall and careful, a man who keeps his shoulders square on purpose. The other is compact and quiet, palms loose at his sides, gaze steady, mouth a straight line that does not like surprises. Both wear jackets. Both carry the weight of 40 years that do not belong to them. A local officer waits near the curb, the brim of his cap straight as a rule. A fourth man, the district attorney investigator, lingers by the mailbox with a manila folder tucked tight against his ribs as if it could run away. Inside the house, a kettle clicks and rests. A clock in the kitchen does its round. A dog 2 houses down gives a half bark and then thinks better of it. The man who opens the screen door looks like every neighbor who minds his own business. He is in his early 70s by the paper, early 60s by the stance, and timeless by the way shock can make a person look like a child who forgot his line. Silver hair cropped short, gray sweatshirt, sweatpants with a thin seam, bare feet on tile. In his right hand, a mug that reads, "Best Route Driver," letters faded by too many dish cycles. He blinks once at the badges. He tries to square the scene with the habit of his morning. He fails. The tall detective breathes in, breathes out. The sentence he has practiced for years arrives without tremor. "Sir, you are under arrest for the murder of Erin Morales on June 6, 1984, in Los Angeles County, California." The mug falls. Ceramic meets tile. The sound is sharp and brittle. Coffee fans across the floor and curls around a rubber mat like a slow river around a bend. A brown crescent licks the baseboard. The man flinches at the break, not at the words. Then the words catch up. His eyes go wide in a way that means the past came back faster than he planned. "Are you sure?" he starts, and then stops, because the question answers itself. Hands go behind his back. Metal clicks. The compact detective says the caution, each phrase crisp and clear. The local officer steps in with a blue evidence bag and scoops up the broken pieces of the morning. Outside, a neighbor in a robe stands behind a porch pillar and peeks. Another neighbor holds a phone at chest height and pretends not to. On the porch, the tall detective looks at the mountains and swallows. He grew up on this side of the Sierra. He learned to drive in these streets. He does not think of any of that now. He thinks of a box in a basement in Los Angeles County. He thinks of paper that turned soft at the edges and ink that faded to the color of old smoke. He thinks of the apron and the smear on the knot where the tie meets the fold. He thinks of the lab analyst, who was too stubborn to accept that old is the same as gone. The genealogy report rested on a single page, a tree like a river delta, branches that went sideways and up and under, names he never heard, birthplaces he will never see. At the center, a probability. Not a direct match, not a slam dunk, not the lottery, a cousin, from a cousin, a line, from a line, a list, from a list, a name, from a name, a face, from a face, a front door. Every step neat, quiet, and lawful. He remembers the call to his lieutenant, how his voice stayed calm while his pulse did not. He remembers the first time he said Erin's name out loud in present tense and did not feel like he was breaking a rule. He remembers the daughter on a speakerphone, miles away and wary, listening as the past unfolded like a map she had memorized at 5 years old and then folded again because it hurt to hold it. The compact detective guides the man down the little porch steps. The cuffs glint in the flat light. The man does not stumble. He does not argue. In the middle of the yard he stops, just long enough to tilt his head toward the southeast, as if he can see through houses and streets to a corner of the valley he left a lifetime ago. Maybe he hears something we cannot. A payphone clack, a diner door sigh, a small child's laugh. Then he lowers his gaze and continues, one slow step, then another. A neighbor whispers, "I knew he was odd." The other neighbor says nothing because the world has taught her how often certainty is wrong. The back door of the sedan opens. The man bends, slides in, sits. The door shuts with that thud that makes even the innocent feel guilty. The detectives take their places. The cars pull away. The wind chime offers a second note that lands lighter than the first. That is how an era ends. Not with a flourish, but with a two-word click and a sedan easing into traffic. News breaks, fast and weird now. Someone posts a clip before the cars clear the block. A local station pulls the file from the vault, finds a yearbook photo of a woman with short dark hair and a smile that looks like she is trying not to laugh during a picture that matters. The caption says her name. The anchor says it twice. The county spokeswoman says the phrase, "everyone waits for." After decades of investigation, a suspect is in custody. In Ranlow Hills, the day had started like any other. Small things, steady as a heartbeat. Children dawdle on sidewalks. A delivery truck idles behind a school bus and does not honk. A dog yips at nothing visible. Sun cuts across the Oaks Market sign and catches a dust tail in the air. A server at a breakfast place early sets the counter, with napkins folded into tight triangles that point to noon. Someone sees the news on a cracked phone while buying oranges, says "oh my God" too loud, and then lowers her voice because habit is strong in this town. Someone texts a cousin who used to live on Clybourne Street. Someone calls a mother who left years ago and never came back and says, "You need to sit down." Someone walks to the memorial bench and stops 6 feet short because that is how close they get. Someone else sits on the end of it and does not look at the plaque because that is how they learn to live. 2 detectives in Los Angeles County stand around a conference table that has seen too many donuts and not enough clean endings. A caseboard leans against a wall like a friend who stayed. The board is not a trope here. It is a map in 3 dimensions. Photos, a street grid, a diner sign in sun flare, a strip of asphalt where a blue Pinto once stopped and then waited too long, a narrow ditch where reeds grew, a hospital sheet white under fluorescent lights, a snapshot of a child who is now a woman, a name card under a portrait from an Oregon license. The pushpins are red and blue, and a yellow that was on sale the year the case was first reopened. The lieutenant is older now. He came on the case when his hair was all black and his temper was all front. He is retired now, but retirement is a word you use when you need to make a change feel tidy. He watches the clip of the mug breaking again on a tablet that a grandson set up for him. He tastes coffee in his mouth that he did not drink. He decides this is his favorite sound. Not the break, but the quiet right after. The pause where grief stops moving and justice takes one small step. An analyst stands in a cold room that hums. Machines blink like small, polite cities. Cases sit in gray bins, each one a private planet with its own weather. Her coat is zipped to her chin. Her breath fogs in the nearest reflection. The apron is on a clean mat. The knot is tight, the cotton stiff. She teases a stain from the weave without tearing it. A little square that would look like nothing to anyone who does not speak this language. She slides it into a tube. She prints a label, careful as a goldsmith. She writes the name she has read so many times that it feels like a prayer. She does not say the name out loud, because some work you do with your hands and your head, and you keep your mouth still, so you do not start to cry. The chain of custody on this case is a saga. It moved from a back room in a substation, to a box in a main evidence facility, to a shelf near a humming refrigerator, to a line on a spreadsheet that nobody paid attention to until one person did. It crossed 4 supervisors. It survived 2 floods. It got lost once, for 12 days, and then turned up inside a larger box labeled traffic unit, which is not a metaphor, just a fact that made 3 people swear and then laugh because the other option was not useful. The defense will say later that DNA is not destiny, that contamination is real, that incidental contact exists. The state will nod and say yes, and then show the path from the apron to the profile to the tree to the name to the cup in a diner trash can 7 states away. The state will say, the profile did not ride a breeze or hitch a ride under a nail or drift down by accident into the cloth knot that sat under a red light at a cash register in a small diner where Erin tied it every night. The jury will listen. 12 people will carry the weight of a town for a little while so the town can put it down, but that is later. Right now is the moment where the line that started on a June night in the valley meets a Tuesday morning in Nevada, and 2 men who were children when Erin died watch a door close on a man who was an adult then and is older now. Justice dislikes speed. It likes patience. It respects the long game more than the quick strike. Sometimes it needs science to hand it a ladder back in time. The tall detective thinks of the daughter again, and the way the word mom landed in her throat when she said it to strangers. She was 5 the year the county changed course just a little. She was 6 the year a neighbor planted a sapling near a bench. She was 7 when a teacher asked the class to draw family, and she drew a woman with a short haircut and small hands and a smile that was all teeth. She is grown now, with a job that does not ask for a uniform and a habit of standing near doors. She paused when they told her the name. She said, "I do not know him." She said, "I knew there was a name." She said, "Thank you, and I am not okay" in the same breath, which is how truth often sounds. In the control room at a small station, a producer counts frames. 2 anchors read the same words in different order and end up in the same place. A camera operator rolls in on the shot just enough to feel it. A lower third reads, "Arrest in 1984, cold case." A second line reads, "Suspect lived in Nevada." A third line reads, "DNA genealogy used." The phrase genealogy used to belong to family reunions and .com hobbies. In this new world, it belongs to courtrooms and relief that arrives in fragments. The suspect sits in a holding room in Reno. The chair rocks a fraction. The table is scratched. Initials on a corner where someone forgot to tell a kid that the pen he got for finishing a program is not a thing to carve with. He stares at a wall that does not stare back. His eyes are the color of water you do not want to drink. His hands are quiet. A lawyer sits down across from him with a file that is thicker than he expected. The lawyer says a name. Erin. The suspect blinks again. The lawyer watches that blink and files it in a private drawer. In Los Angeles County, a evidence tech tapes a new label on an old box. The tape peels slow and then sticks, eager to make up for lost time. A clerk updates a case management entry. The cursor blinks, annoyed, patient, relentless. A captain walks the length of a corridor and stops twice to answer questions that he has answered before with less hope. A sergeant texts his wife that he will be late, and she texts back a thumbs up and a heart that feels small and true. A deputy leans his forehead on the steering wheel of a car that smells like old coffee and new plastic. He does not cry. He stays very still until the impulse to cry goes past like a train you chose not to board. The town where this began was never fancy. It had strip malls and stubborn trees and kids who learned to ride bikes too close to the curb. It had a diner where you could get pie that was never great and coffee that was never cold. It had a woman who tied an apron knot with a method so consistent that her coworkers could tell when she was tired by the way the tie sat, a little to one side. She left a shift one night and got into a car that groaned when it started. She drove home the way she always did. She was found 5 days later, where the water slows, and the reeds grow tall, and the freeway hum does not reach. People with clipboards and gloves did their work. People without either stood at a distance and clutched elbows and looked down and then up and then away. For years after, the air in Ranlow Hills had a slice of silence no one could fix. People learned to live around it. They took different streets. They stopped letting their kids ride bikes too close to the curb. They learned which questions to avoid and which names to say softly. They bought locks and extra porch lights and hung them like charms against a past that did not care about charms. In the pause after one season and before the next, the name Erin lived on papers and on a bench, and in the throat of a child who had to become an adult before she was ready. All of that is still there, even now, as the car with its human cargo crosses a city limit sign and merges with a traffic flow that chooses not to notice. Even now, as paperwork clicks forward like some polite machine that lives only to be correct. Even now, as a county spokesperson reads the line crafted by 3 minds and approved by 2. The line is accurate. The line is clean. The line will sit in clips for as long as clips sit in clouds. None of this feels clean. That is why the mug-breaking moment matters. It is messy and small and human. It is the sound of a secret that has been held too long, finally losing its grip. The tall detective knows the case will not end here. The first win is an arrest. The last win is a jury and a judge and a calendar that says time served is not the same as debt paid. Between those two wins lie 1,000 small labors, motions and replies, chain of custody lectures, experts who will be polite and precise and hard to cross, exhibits labeled and relabeled, and then labeled again just in case. 4 survivors who will decide whether to speak in open court. One will not. One will try and stop after 2 sentences, and that will be enough. One will write a letter and allow the prosecutor to read it in a voice that does not line up with the handwriting at all. But for this morning, the detective lets himself stand in the knowledge that the door opened, and the sentence was said, and the cuffs clicked, and the car rolled away. And the long line that began in 1984 drew a neat dark period at its far end. Not the last period, not the final one, a period all the same. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you are in the right place. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. Ranlow Hills sits in the outer reach of Los Angeles County, where the valley begins to forget itself and turns slowly into desert. In the 1980s, it was still a place of cracked sidewalks, low stucco homes, and backyard lemon trees that never quite ripened. The streetlights hummed. The nights were warm and empty. People left their porch lights on, but not out of fear, out of habit. Erin Morales made her life here. She was 28, a single mother, a waitress on the night shift at a place called Marcy's Diner, the kind of 24-hour holdout that kept its coffee cheap and its stories free. She lived with her daughter, Sophia, in a 1-bedroom duplex off Clybourne Street. The building leaned a little toward the west, as if tired from watching the sun set over the San Gabriels for too many years. The paint was pale green, the lawn narrow, and the air always carried a trace of fried food from the diner downtown. Every morning, Erin left a light on over the sink. She said it was for Sophia, but really it was for herself to make sure the house didn't look lonely when she came home after midnight. Her day started late. She'd wake around 10, make a pot of coffee, and pack Sophia's lunch for kindergarten. 2 peanut butter sandwiches, a small apple, a folded napkin with a smile drawn in pen. Her neighbor, Mrs. Hillman, an older widow who lived in the other half of the duplex, watched Sophia while Erin worked. They had a quiet rhythm. Mrs. Hillman brought cookies. Erin brought diner leftovers. They understood each other's silences. People who knew Erin said she carried herself with a kind of unspoken order, as if she could keep chaos at bay just by following a list. She'd been that way since the accident, since Robert, her husband, was killed in a construction fall in Bakersfield 3 years earlier. After the funeral, she packed a single car, drove south, and started over in Los Angeles County with no family near and no plan beyond survival. She took the job at Marcy's the first week she arrived. The owner, a heavy-set man named Vince, gave her the late shift because no one else wanted it. "Tips are better when the coffee's gone bad," he told her. She smiled and said she could handle it. She could handle most things. Erin wasn't beautiful in the loud way the city liked. She was soft-featured, brown-haired, the kind of woman strangers trusted with their wallets and worries. She didn't drink. She didn't flirt with customers. She worked, went home, and cared for her daughter. That was the story she wrote every night, one order slip at a time. Ranlow Hills didn't have much crime in those years. Petty theft, bar fights, the occasional stolen bicycle. The sheriff's substation closed at 6 in the evening. Everyone knew everyone else. It was the kind of place where you waved at the mailman and actually knew his first name. The summer of 1984 was supposed to be quiet. The Olympic torch had passed through the county that June, and people still talked about it like a small miracle. There was talk of growth, of developers buying lots near the freeway. But the nights stayed the same, slow, warm, uneventful. Marcy's sat on the corner of Main Avenue and 5th, a low building with neon that flickered between open and ope. Inside, the air smelled like coffee, bleach, and bacon grease. The jukebox in the corner played mostly love songs from the 60s because no one had fed it new records since '79. Truckers came through before dawn, Teenagers came through after midnight. Regulars came through always. Erin knew them all. There was Lou, who drove for a bakery in the valley and always ordered 2 eggs and 2 jokes before his shift. There was Denise, a nurse from the county hospital who came in after the graveyard shift and fell asleep on the counter sometimes. And there was a man who sat alone most nights near the window, never talking much, just writing in a small notebook while nursing black coffee until close. Erin never asked his name, but she remembered his face. Everyone remembered faces in towns like this. On good nights, she'd finish early, clean the counters, lock the register, and drive home in her blue Ford Pinto. On nights when the cook was late or the manager stayed to count the drawer, she'd walk. 10 minutes flat, she used to say. Just 10 minutes down Main, past the laundromat, across Maple, turn right at the liquor store, left at the old water tower. If I can't be safe in my own town, she'd once told Mrs. Hillman, then what's the point? It wasn't bravado, it was faith. Her friends teased her for how precise she was. Coffee at 6:15. Shower at 6:30. Out the door by 7:10. Clock in at 6, on the dot, every night. Her boss once said you could set your watch by her. People liked that about her. It made them feel safe, too. Sophia was 5 that year. Brown curls, small frame, already a serious child. She loved crayons, pancakes, and her mother's perfume, which she called the smell of clean hugs. She didn't understand words like widow or shift work. She just knew her mother left when the sun went down and came back when it was gray again. Sometimes Erin would lift her from bed, still half asleep, and tuck her into their small couch while she changed out of her uniform. She'd whisper, "Mommy's home," and Sophia would smile without opening her eyes. That routine held for 3 years, steady as a heartbeat. Then came June. The first week of that month, the weather turned strange. The valley got a dry wind that carried dust from the high desert. Everyone complained, their throats hurt. The air tasted metallic, like something burning far away. Still, life went on. The diner filled, the lights buzzed, and Erin tied her apron each night in the mirror behind the register, making sure the knot sat centered. She didn't know that habit would save her case decades later. Vince, her boss, told police later that she'd been in good spirits that week. She'd asked for the weekend off to take Sophia to the beach in Ventura. She'd even joked about buying sunscreen for the first time since Robert died. She was turning a corner, he said. She looked like someone remembering how to live. Ranlow Hills was the kind of place that measured time in small-town rituals. The grocery sale on Wednesdays, the high school football game on Fridays, the church fair in July. People waved across the street. They lingered in doorways. They said things like, "Take care now," and meant it. So when Erin didn't show up at home one morning, everyone noticed. But that comes later. For now, this chapter belongs to the life she built, the fragile, ordinary one that would vanish overnight. If you drove through Ranlow Hills in the early 80s, you'd see why people stayed. The roads were wide and slow. The air smelled of sun-baked asphalt and orange blossoms from the groves that still clung to the outskirts. Kids rode bikes through sprinklers. Teenagers parked near the overlook above the freeway to watch the city lights blink awake. There was one movie theater, one grocery store, 2 churches, and one diner that stayed open all night. The world beyond the hills felt far away. Erin didn't talk much about her past. Most of her coworkers thought she was from somewhere north, maybe Fresno. She kept photos of Sophia and Robert on a corkboard in her locker, both printed in black and white because she said color made her feel sad. She didn't date. She didn't have time, she said. But truthfully, she didn't have trust left. Robert's accident had changed that. He'd fallen from a scaffolding at a job site, no safety line, no one to catch him. The company sent flowers. She sold his tools and moved south before the lawsuit even settled. Her parents wrote once a year. She never wrote back. She wasn't unfriendly, just self-contained. The kind of person who seemed like she was always holding something delicate and invisible, something that would break if anyone touched it too hard. Every small town has a person like that, the one who keeps it running without ever being noticed. Erin was that person for Marcy's. She made sure the coffee stayed hot, the regulars stayed fed, and the till balanced at the end of the night. Vince used to joke she was his best employee because she never asked for anything. She asked for one thing once. In May of '84, she asked for a different shift, earlier hours, maybe afternoon, so she could be home more with Sophia. Vince told her he'd think about it. He never did. He wasn't cruel, just busy. And there was always someone louder asking for something else. Erin didn't press. She took her schedule and went back to work. That small moment, one denied favor, would later haunt him. The diner itself had its own life. Vinyl booths cracked at the seams, a menu that hadn't changed in 15 years. The big clock behind the counter that lost 2 minutes a week no matter how often you reset it. Customers carved initials into the wood ledge under the window. Someone had written "Be kind" or "Be gone" in marker above the payphone. No one erased it. Erin liked that message. It matched the way she lived. Most nights between midnight and 2 were slow. She'd wipe the counter, fill ketchup bottles, hum along with the radio. Sometimes she'd glance outside and see the town asleep, the liquor store light buzzing, the gas station across the street glowing pale green, the long straight road vanishing into darkness. She said once that the quiet made her feel safe, like the world was giving her time to breathe before it started demanding again. When customers stayed too long, she'd politely say, "We close soon, hun," even though they technically didn't. When drunks came in loud, she'd pour them water and smile until they realized they'd made a fool of themselves. She handled everything gently. People remembered that later, too. They'd say she had patience that didn't seem possible for someone who'd lost so much. That was Erin Morales. Not a headline. Not a mystery. A person who believed that if she just kept moving, she could keep the bad things behind her. Mrs. Hillman, her neighbor, remembered something strange that week. She said Erin had been distracted during their morning chats. She'd asked twice whether anyone new had moved into the duplex across the street, the one that had been empty for months. Mrs. Hillman said no, but she noticed Erin looking at it again later that day from her porch, eyes narrowed against the sunlight. When police asked later, Mrs. Hillman said it wasn't fear, she saw it was curiosity, maybe recognition. No one else mentioned the house. It would come up later in reports, a minor note in a case full of major ones. Erin's last payday before the summer was on June 1st. She cashed her check at the liquor store, bought a box of popsicles for Sophia, and spent the rest of the afternoon on the porch, watching her daughter ride her tricycle in uneven circles. She waved to the mailman, watered her small potted plant, and fixed a loose hinge on the screen door. Around sunset, she went inside and turned on the radio. She liked old love songs, the kind with too much piano and not enough truth. That was the last normal week. If you asked the people of Ranlow Hills what they remember most about Erin, they'll tell you it wasn't the tragedy. It was the steadiness, the quiet dignity of someone who kept showing up. The woman who remembered birthdays, who brought extra pie to work for the cooks, who let her daughter draw on old menus with colored pens. When the world finally broke that routine, it broke something in the town too. But that comes next. June 6th, 1984, a Wednesday. The air over Ranlow Hills felt still, as if the town itself were waiting for something it couldn't name. Erin Morales woke before the alarm. Sunlight slid through the blinds and painted thin lines across her daughter's blanket. Sophia slept hard, small hand curled under her chin. Erin let her rest. She moved quietly through the kitchen, started the coffee, and looked out the window. The street was empty, just the soft shimmer of heat, already beginning to rise from the asphalt. She poured a mug, took one sip, and smiled to herself. Payday. 2 shifts left until her weekend with Sophia. They would drive to Ventura, she'd promised. Sand, water, and air that smelled like salt instead of smog. At 10:30, she walked Sophia next door to Mrs. Hillman's and kissed her goodbye. "I'll be home before the stars come out," she said. Mrs. Hillman watched her go, and later told police she'd never seen Erin look happier. By late afternoon, the valley air thickened. The temperature climbed into the 90s, and the tar on the road glistened. Inside Marcy's diner, the ceiling fan pushed heat in slow circles. Erin tied her apron in the mirror behind the counter, checked her hair, and tightened the knot. She clocked in at 6, sharp. The regulars trickled in. Lou from the bakery, Denise the nurse, and the young man with the notebook. He sat in his usual corner seat, same black coffee, same unshaven face. Erin brought his refill without asking. He nodded but said nothing. The jukebox sputtered to life with a track from the 60s. Erin hummed along. She kept the rhythm of the night orders, refills, the clang of the register drawer. At 8:15, the security camera above the counter caught a moment that would later matter. Erin, laughing, tossing her hair, handing a customer his change. A perfectly ordinary fragment frozen in time. Near 11, the diner emptied. The cook wiped down his grill. The air smelled of onions and bleach. Erin used the payphone to call Mrs. Hillman. "I'm heading home soon," she said. "Sophia, asleep?" "She's out like a light," the old woman answered. Erin smiled. "Tell her I'll bring pancakes tomorrow." She hung up, gathered her purse, and stepped into the parking lot. The pavement still radiated warmth. She waved to the cook, locking the back door. Then she crossed the lot toward her blue Ford Pinto. The car door creaked as it opened. The taillights glowed red once, then disappeared down Main Avenue. That was the last confirmed sighting of Erin Morales alive. By 12:30, Mrs. Hillman stirred awake. She thought she heard a car door, but when she peeked through the curtain, the driveway was empty. At 2 a.m., she called the sheriff's station. The dispatcher told her to wait until morning. "She probably stopped for gas," he said. By sunrise, the Pinto was found 2 blocks from the diner. Door cracked open, keys still dangling in the ignition. Inside sat Erin's purse, $32 in bills, her ID, a tube of lipstick without its cap. No sign of struggle, no footprints in the dust, just stillness. Detectives arrived within the hour. They documented everything, careful and quiet. The neighborhood began to gather, whispering behind fences. Someone said they'd heard a car late at night. Someone else said they hadn't heard a thing. The lieutenant looked at the scene and said it felt wrong, too neat, too calm, as if the world had been staged to erase what had really happened. That afternoon, the search began. Officers, volunteers, neighbors combing alleys and empty lots, flyers on telephone poles, questions with no answers. And the small town of Ranlow Hills, which had once believed it was safe, started to hold its breath. For the people who loved her, that day never truly ended. The sun set, rose again, and the calendar turned, but part of the town remained caught at the moment when a woman stepped out of a diner, started her car, and vanished into warm night air. The last normal day became the border between 2 lives before and after. Before, the town moved on instinct. After, it moved on memory. No one knew then that the truth would hide in a box of old evidence, waiting 40 years to speak. The sun rose over Ranlow Hills the morning after Erin's disappearance, turning the valley gold and empty. By 8 o'clock, her Pinto had become the center of the town's worry. Deputy Carter arrived first. He found the car half-parked along a dirt shoulder, the driver's door ajar, keys hanging from the ignition like a question. Inside, Erin's purse sat neatly on the seat. The bills were stacked, her wallet zipped, her lipstick uncapped. A cup of coffee, half-finished, sat in the holder. The steam was gone. He called it in. Within the hour, the small parking lot filled with uniforms and quiet voices. A photographer worked his way around the car, while another deputy placed numbered tags in the dust. The number 1 for the purse. The number 2 for the keys. The number 3 for a faint smear on the doorframe that looked like oil. The lieutenant noted everything, though nothing made sense. Behind the car stretched a dirt alley. It led toward a dry wash filled with reeds and soda cans. Someone noticed a set of marks in the soil, narrow and shallow, as if something heavy had been dragged or maybe carried unevenly. They followed the trail until it disappeared into the ditch. There, they found a diner apron tangled in brush. The white cloth was stiff with dirt, a faded red streak running along one corner. The name tag still clung to it. Marcy's Diner, Erin M. The lieutenant folded the fabric into a paper bag himself. "We'll let the lab tell us the rest," he said, though everyone already felt what that stain meant. For 3 days, the search widened. Volunteers combed the dry fields. The sheriff's department borrowed horses and dogs from a neighboring county. Flyers appeared on every power pole. Erin's photograph printed from the diner's yearbook snapshot, smiling, unaware of her future. The town's radio station interrupted songs to read updates. By the 5th day, when hope had worn thin, a volunteer named Jesse found a shoe near the flood channel, a plain white flat, size 7. Another 100 yards farther, in a tangle of reeds, they found what they had all been trying not to imagine. The area was sealed within minutes. The coroner's van arrived before noon. Reporters gathered at the yellow tape. The sound of their cameras clicked like insects in the heat. The lieutenant said nothing to them. He only watched as the stretcher was carried to the van, the white sheet fluttering once in the valley wind. The autopsy confirmed what the scene already whispered. No gun, no knife. Strangulation. No sign of assault beyond bruising on her arms and the mark across her neck. She had fought, not for long, but long enough to leave the trace that would matter decades later. In her hair, a single blonde strand that did not belong to her. On her jacket, a faint touch of skin oil, too small to identify in 1984. The evidence was sealed, labeled, and stored in a box marked simply, Morales, E. And the town of Ranlow Hills began its slow descent into silence. For weeks afterward, people left flowers near the ditch. Cars slowed as they passed the diner, headlights flicking in silent respect. Sophia stayed with Mrs. Hillman. The child asked when her mother would come home. No one could answer in a way that made sense to a 5-year-old. The case filled 4 binders. It gained a number, a code, and a shelf. The lieutenant told reporters they were pursuing leads. He didn't say how thin those leads were. Each night he drove the streets where Erin had walked, headlights sweeping the same cracked pavement. He'd park near the spot where the car had been found, engine idling, wondering what he had missed. Every investigator has one case that follows them into dreams. This was his. Summer slid into autumn. The flyers faded. The county fair came and went. Marcy's Diner replaced Erin's name on the schedule but kept her photo above the counter. Customers lowered their voices when they pointed to it. Ranlow Hills kept moving slowly, cautiously, like a town learning to live with a bruise it couldn't hide. Every anniversary brought a small gathering at the spot near the ditch. They said prayers, lit candles, and promised they would not forget. The evidence box waited in storage, quiet, patient, untouched by time except for dust. No one could know that inside that box, on the knot of that apron, a few invisible cells had survived the years, the whisper of the truth that would one day speak. The days after the discovery blurred together. Morning bled into afternoon, afternoon into evening. Sirens no longer startled anyone. They were part of the air now. The sheriff's department set up a command post inside the town hall. Folding tables, maps, pushpins, coffee urns that never ran dry. Detectives came and went in pairs, their shirts wrinkled from nights spent at their desks. The same questions looped through every conversation. Who saw her last? What cars passed the diner? What went missing? What didn't? By the second week, Ranlow Hills had turned itself inside out. Volunteers scoured alleys, drainage ditches, and abandoned sheds. The search lines moved across the dry valley like a living thing, bright shirts against brown earth. Helicopters from the county circled low, blades chopping the quiet. From the air, the town looked small, barely a dozen square blocks, surrounded by nothing but scrub and sun. Every local business taped Erin's photo to its window. Marcy's Diner stayed open but quiet. The jukebox stayed silent. Customers still came for coffee but not conversation. Her corner of the counter stayed empty, a space that no one touched. At the school, teachers kept Sophia inside during recess. Reporters lingered at the fence, waiting for a picture they'd never get. Mrs. Hillman kept the curtains drawn. The little girl colored at the kitchen table, humming songs her mother used to sing at bedtime. Chief Alvarez from the county task force arrived on the 4th day. He was a methodical man, the kind who spoke in short bursts and kept his eyes fixed on the evidence. He told the press, "We believe someone local knew her movements." Behind closed doors, he said something else. "This doesn't feel like a stranger." Fear moved faster than fact. Rumors began before the ink on the missing posters had dried. One claimed a drifter from Barstow had been seen near the diner. Another said it was an ex-boyfriend, a name no one could confirm. A few insisted they'd heard shouting that night, though every version contradicted the last. In the grocery store, conversation stopped when strangers walked in. At the church, the pastor added an extra prayer for patience. People started locking their doors again, something they hadn't done in years. Porch lights burned through the night like small promises of safety. The sheriff's office held a town meeting in the high school gym. Folding chairs lined up in rows, the smell of floor polish and nervous sweat. Chief Alvarez spoke for 20 minutes, explaining the search patterns, the forensic testing, the way evidence had to move through state labs. When he finished, hands shot up like arrows. Why did this happen here? Are we safe? Have you caught him? He had no answers that felt big enough. We are pursuing leads, he said. We won't stop until we know. Margaret Hillman stood near the back, her arms around Sophia. She didn't speak, but everyone saw her there and went quiet. The sight of that child did what words could not. It reminded them that behind every rumor, there was a person still waiting for a door to open that never would. By midsummer, the panic had hardened into vigilance. Residents formed night watches. Men patrolled in pairs, flashlights cutting across empty yards. The sheriff's line received calls for every unfamiliar car, every sound at midnight. Most were false alarms. A branch breaking, a dog barking, someone's back gate swinging in the wind. The investigation produced more paperwork than progress. Officers interviewed every customer from the diners last night. They checked delivery routes, payphone logs, utility records. Each lead dissolved into nothing. The only thing they knew for sure was the time she left work, the car found untouched, and the apron that tied her to the place where her life ended. The heat pressed down on everything. By August, even the cicadas had gone quiet. For detectives, the case became both duty and ghost story. They revisited the site after dark, retracing steps with flashlights and tape measures. They stood where the Pinto had been parked and tried to picture how the night unfolded. They disagreed about details but agreed on one thing. Whoever did this knew the rhythm of the town, the moments when its guard dropped. A theory formed: someone had followed her for weeks, learning her route, knowing when she walked alone. It wasn't the kind of knowledge a stranger picked up by chance. Still, they had no name. The DNA work of that era could identify blood types, not faces. The evidence boxes filled with labels, trace fibers, apron, partial print, door handle. The state lab promised results within months, but months stretched into years. By the start of 1985, the task force had shrunk to 2 detectives. New cases pushed the old one to the back of the shelf. The flyers came down. The command post closed. The search grid maps folded away like forgotten blueprints. Ranlow Hills exhaled, but it wasn't relief. It was fatigue. The town had been living in a flinch, and now it simply stopped moving. Still, some couldn't let go. Vince, the diner owner, visited the sheriff's office every few weeks, asking if they had found anything new. He stopped wearing the white uniforms and switched to black, saying it felt wrong to look bright. Chief Alvarez retired. His replacement, a younger lieutenant named Curtis Leary, inherited the cold files and promised to keep them open. He meant it, but time has a way of softening even the sharpest intentions. Every January, Mrs. Hillman mailed a letter to the department, asking if they'd found the man who took Erin. Each year, she got the same polite response: investigation remains active. Each year, it meant less. By the end of the decade, Ranlow Hills had grown a little larger, a little louder, but part of it remained caught in 1984. The parking lot where her Pinto was found turned into a hardware store. The ditch where they'd searched was paved over for a service road. Only a few remembered what had once been there. They said that when the wind blew a certain way, you could still smell coffee and motor oil in the air. Most people dismissed it as imagination, but the old-timers nodded quietly, as if they knew the valley itself was keeping score. The fear never fully left. It just changed shape into caution, into superstition, into the stories parents told their children. Don't walk home alone. Don't leave the light off. Don't trust the quiet. For the next 4 decades, the case lived in whispers and filing cabinets, until technology reached far enough back to give those whispers a voice. But in 1984, none of that existed yet. All they had were footprints, a town holding its breath, and a promise that someday someone would find out what really happened to Erin Morales. Autumn settled over Ranlow Hills that year like a curtain. The air cooled, the valley light turned thin, and the case that had once filled every conversation began to fracture into theories. Detectives worked from a small office behind the county courthouse. The walls were lined with maps and Polaroids, and a corkboard held a collage of timestamps and handwritten notes that no longer made sense even to the people who'd written them. Each clue pointed somewhere different. Each lead ended in the same place, nowhere. They had interviews, dozens of them. Truck drivers, delivery men, night clerks, anyone who might have seen a woman leaving a diner near midnight. Most remembered nothing useful. A few remembered everything too clearly, their memories shifting to fit the headlines. When the press lost interest, rumor took over. In small towns, rumor has a rhythm. It begins as sympathy, turns into curiosity, and ends as suspicion. By the first winter after Erin's death, neighbors had divided themselves into quiet camps of belief. One story said the man with the notebook from Marcy's had moved away overnight. Someone claimed he'd left town the morning after the disappearance, leaving behind an unpaid rent notice and a stack of notebooks. When deputies checked, the address led to an empty room, no notebooks, no forwarding information. Another rumor focused on Vince, the diner owner. People whispered that he'd been too quick to clean the place, too eager to reopen. He brushed off the talk, but he stopped going to church for a while. His business survived, though the coffee never seemed to taste the same. A third rumor involved a county worker who'd helped pave the service road near the ditch. Someone thought he looked nervous when asked about the case. He'd only been nervous because people kept asking. Each theory came with a tone of certainty that made the sheriff's deputies wince. They spent more time correcting stories than chasing evidence. The phone at the station rang every few days, somebody sure they'd seen Erin at a bus depot, somebody else sure they'd dreamed where she was buried. Each tip earned a report, a follow-up, a line crossed out when nothing matched. Margaret Hillman carried herself through it with quiet endurance. She stopped reading the newspaper, stopped answering calls from strangers who claimed to be psychics or journalists. She focused on Sophia, now beginning first grade. The little girl drew pictures of her mother, often smiling faces, long brown hair, a yellow sun in the corner of every page. She would hand them to Mrs. Hillman and ask, "Do you think she can see these from heaven?" Mrs. Hillman always answered yes, even when she wasn't sure of anything anymore. Detective Leary checked in once a month. His visits were short. He brought updates that weren't updates, lab results still pending, witness interviews still inconclusive. He meant well, but his voice always carried the same tired phrase, "We're doing everything we can." By the second anniversary, even that phrase began to sound like habit. Ranlow Hills changed in subtle ways. Porch lights stayed on longer, the diner closed earlier, new families moved in, unaware of the history behind certain addresses. The older residents noticed how easily newcomers said, "I heard something happened here once," before changing the subject. The town's newspaper shrank its coverage from front page to a single column of small print under unresolved investigations. Only Margaret kept clipping those updates, folding them into a box beside Erin's photograph. Sometimes she imagined that the investigation was like a clock wound too tightly, so many gears moving that nothing could turn. Inside the evidence room, the boxes multiplied. Each contained fragments that no longer held context: receipts, soil samples, shoe casts, photographs of a car in bright morning light. The detectives labeled everything with care, knowing that labeling might be the only legacy of their work. The county lab tested the small trace from the apron and found almost nothing useful, too degraded, too mixed. They stored it anyway. That single decision would matter decades later, though no one could have guessed. By the 5th year, the file was cold. The deputies stopped checking it unless a supervisor asked. The town learned to live around the absence the way you learn to live with a scar you don't forget, but you stop touching it. Still, the case never truly left them. Every few years, a new detective took over, reviewed the paperwork, and promised to take a fresh look. Each review ended with the same note: no further action possible at this time. People moved away, others moved in. The landscape changed. What didn't change was the quiet unease whenever Erin's name surfaced. Sophia grew, first into a teenager, then into an adult who looked uncannily like her mother. She graduated, left town, built a life elsewhere, but on anniversaries she would still get a letter from Mrs. Hillman, sometimes just a line or two. "I still think of her. I still keep the light on." The sheriff who'd promised closure retired, then passed away. His successor inherited the same file, same evidence, same mystery. By the early 2000s, the case existed only as a story the locals told outsiders. They'd point toward the Valley Road and say, That's where it happened. Most couldn't remember the details anymore, only that something terrible once broke the stillness of their town. And somewhere, in a state archive 2 hours away, a cardboard box labeled Morales E. 1984 gathered dust. Inside it, a folded apron slept beneath layers of forms and signatures. Technology would change. Investigators would change. The town itself would grow until the fields where volunteers once searched became a strip mall and a gas station. But that box remained, holding its quiet proof, waiting for a generation that could finally read what the evidence had been saying all along. The 1990s arrived quietly in Ranlow Hills. The town grew a little larger, a little brighter. New grocery stores went up where the orange groves once stood. The freeway widened, bringing more commuters, more noise, more forgetting. For most people, Erin Morales had become a story from someone else's lifetime. For the sheriff's office, she was a case file on the middle shelf of a metal cabinet. Detective Leary still kept the file on his desk. He told himself it was for easy access, but it was really to remind him that he had unfinished business. Each year on June 6th, he reread every page, hoping that time would give him a new angle. It never did. The evidence logs were neat. The photographs were fading. The truth, whatever it was, stayed still. In 1991, the department switched to digital record keeping. Clerks scanned every open file. Erin's box was entered under cold case 84-617. The data went into the system, but the photos lost color in the process. Her smile became slightly blurred, her eyes washed pale. It made her look even further away. By then, most of the original investigators had retired or moved on. New deputies came in, young, ambitious, skeptical. To them, Erin Morales wasn't a person. She was a cautionary story about lost evidence and dead leads. The department used the case as training material for how not to let a file go stale. Leary didn't like that. He said once, "It's not just a case, it's a promise we broke." But the new recruits had never met her. Promises meant less when they came secondhand. Across town, Mrs. Hillman aged into her 70s. Sophia grew up in her care, then left for college. Every January, Mrs. Hillman mailed a birthday card addressed to Sophia and your mom in heaven. She knew it sounded odd, but she couldn't stop. The ritual mattered more than logic. On quiet afternoons, she'd sit by the window and look at the empty house across the street, the one Erin had once rented. The paint had peeled to dull gray. Tenants came and went. None stayed long. She wondered if they felt the same heaviness she did, the sense that the place still belonged to someone who hadn't finished her time there. The county's cold case board met once a year. Detectives from multiple districts gathered in a conference room to review unsolved files. They called it the Parade of Ghosts. In 1996, Leary presented Erin's case for the last time. He walked through the timeline, showed the photographs, explained the missing link that kept it unsolved, unknown DNA, no witnesses, no confession. A young analyst asked if he'd considered the possibility that the killer had left the state. Leary smiled sadly. "After this long," he said, "he could have changed names, jobs, faces, but he's still out there somewhere. That's what keeps me here." The committee thanked him, made notes, moved on to the next file. That was how the cold years worked. You told the same story to a new audience, and every time the room cared a little less. In the late 90s, DNA testing began to change the field. Larger cities re-examined their unsolved homicides with new lab equipment, but small counties like Ranlow Hills couldn't afford it yet. The technology felt futuristic, something that belonged to state agencies, not to local departments with outdated microscopes and one evidence freezer that sometimes iced over. Still, Leary made calls. He wrote letters to the state crime lab in Sacramento, asking if old samples could be reanalyzed when funding allowed. He received polite replies that promised inclusion in future reviews. He retired 2 years later without seeing those reviews begin. Before he left, he packed Erin's box himself, sealing it with fresh tape and writing the date across the top. Then he carried it to the storage vault, placed it on a middle shelf, and stood for a long time looking at it. He didn't say goodbye. He just whispered, "Stay where I can find you." The new millennium came. Ranlow Hills changed again. Strip malls, a new high school, an industrial park. The diner closed in 2002 after Vince passed away. A nail salon opened in its place, the neon letters still buzzing from the old wiring. No one thought to remove the faint outline of the original sign, Marcy's, still visible on the stucco when the sun hit it at a certain angle. To the new residents, it was just a ghost word with no story attached. In 2005, the Sheriff's Department formed a small cold case unit. It was part of a state initiative to modernize evidence storage and re-examine unresolved crimes using DNA technology. Detective Sarah Cho, a newcomer from Orange County, was assigned to the project. When she opened the storage log for Los Angeles County's northern sector, she saw the name Morales, Erin, 1984. She pulled the box out of storage one afternoon, expecting dust and disappointment. What she found instead was careful labeling and neat handwriting. Someone had cared. She checked the chain of custody, every transfer documented perfectly. She placed the apron sample in a new evidence bag and shipped it to the state lab for preservation. The lab, overwhelmed with backlog, cataloged it but didn't test it. It would sit there for another decade. Still, the action mattered. The file had moved again, if only slightly. That small motion, a few inches on a shelf, was the kind of progress most cold cases never got. For the people who remembered Erin, the years drifted between forgetting and guilt. Some nights Mrs. Hillman would still hear the faint buzz of a streetlight and think of the night Erin didn't come home. She would stand by the window, feel the desert wind on her face, and whisper, "We're still here, honey." For Sophia, the memory was both anchor and burden. She grew into a woman who never missed a flight, never broke a promise, never walked alone at night. When asked about her mother, she'd say, she was careful. Then she'd change the subject. By 2015, the county archive had digitized its evidence catalog. Erin's case, now nearly 40 years old, was marked pending DNA review. Tier C priority. Tier A were active prosecutions. Tier B were recent cold cases with living suspects. Tier C were files that most agencies assumed would never move again. But time has a way of circling back. Technology improves, databases expand. A chance decision, a technician running one more test before clocking out, can unearth something the past thought it had buried. That moment was coming, even if no one in Ranlow Hills knew it yet. For now, the town lived with its quiet ghost story. The blue dusk, the hum of power lines, the echo of a promise made by detectives who once said they wouldn't forget. The cold years were not about nothing happening. They were about everything staying the same. Until the day the box was opened again. The story moved again on a morning that no one in Ranlow Hills noticed. It was April of 2024, a Wednesday, quiet except for the low hum of traffic drifting from the freeway. In a sterile lab outside Sacramento, a technician named Maya Tran slid a tray of archived samples into a new generation of DNA sequencer. She was retesting material from decades-old cold cases routine work, part of a statewide modernization push. There were hundreds of envelopes, each labeled in handwriting from another era. One of them read simply, Morales, E. Apron fragment. Maya didn't know who Erin Morales was. To her, it was one more barcode. But when the machine finished its cycle 3 days later, the screen displayed a full genetic profile, clean, complete, male. That almost never happened with samples that old. She checked the log twice, then a third time. Everything matched. She entered the sequence into CODIS, the combined DNA index system, and hit submit. The computer processed for a long moment. Then it returned a single word, match. Not a direct hit, but a familiar one, a relative connection. The kind that meant a close family member's DNA was already in the system. Maya printed the report, initialed it, and passed it to her supervisor. Within an hour, it was on the desk of Detective Isaac Grant at the state's cold case unit in Los Angeles County. Grant was 53, a veteran investigator who had spent half his career chasing the past. His office was lined with corkboards full of unsolved names. He read the report twice, his expression somewhere between disbelief and recognition. He'd seen the name Morales in old county indexes, back when the files were still on microfilm. He called the lab to confirm. "You're saying we have a living relative?" "That's right," Maya answered. "The match is partial but strong. First-degree relation, maybe a son or brother of the donor." Grant leaned back in his chair. And the donor was found on what? An apron, she said. Bagged in 1984. He let out a quiet breath. Then it's been waiting 40 years to talk. The next morning, Grant drove to the county evidence vault in Lancaster. The building smelled of paper and dust, the air cool and still. A clerk signed out the Morales file, 2 boxes sealed in faded tape. Inside were Polaroids, handwritten statements, and a diner uniform folded into brown paper. The tag still read Marcy's. He held the apron up to the light, saw the faint reddish stain near the pocket. On one corner, someone had written item 4A in careful blue ink. He thought about the detective who'd labeled it a man who was probably long retired or gone. That detective had done something right, saving it from the purge that cleared old evidence in the 90s. Grant resealed the bag, replaced it in the box, and took photos with his phone. Then he opened the original case report. The first line read, "Victim last seen leaving diner at approximately midnight, June 6, 1984. He turned the page. Witness statements, search grids, a town frozen in panic. Every sentence felt like a voice from another time, calling out for resolution. Grant brought the file to his supervisor, Captain Elena Ruiz, who had overseen the cold case unit since 2020. She read the summary, silent, her brow furrowing. "We can build on this," she said finally. "The match gives us a family tree. Genealogy can finish what DNA started." They contacted a forensic genealogy specialist, Dr. Clara Nguyen, a civilian contractor who had helped solve 2 high-profile cases the year before. She built family networks from public databases, combining science with patience. Clara received the anonymized data set on a Friday. By Monday, she had built a partial family tree leading to a cluster of relatives in southern Nevada. The closest branch belonged to a 72-year-old man named David Keller, a retired delivery driver with no criminal record, living quietly in Reno. The name meant nothing to her, but when Grant saw the surname, something in the back of his mind shifted. The original victim's name, Morales, matched a newspaper clipping he'd once read. Single mother found slain near diner, daughter placed with neighbor, Mrs. Hillman. Hillman, Keller, Morales. The threads began to cross. Grant authorized discreet surveillance. Nevada detectives confirmed that Keller matched the age and genetic probability suggested by the genealogical analysis. They obtained a warrant for a discarded DNA sample, a coffee cup left at a diner. When the results came back, the lab called Grant personally. "It's him," the technician said. "Full match to the original apron sample." The call went out to the district attorney's office. Within 48 hours, extradition paperwork was ready. On a clear morning in May, 2 unmarked cars rolled to a stop outside a small house on Carson Street in Reno. The suspect was watering his lawn. He looked up, confused, as the detectives approached. When they said his name and showed their badges, he froze. The arrest was calm, almost surreal. Neighbors filmed on their phones. The news reached Los Angeles County by noon. The same station that had once broadcast Erin's disappearance now opened its midday segment with new words. Cold case solved after 40 years. Back in Ranlow Hills, the announcement spread faster than rumor ever had. Old residents called one another, voices breaking with disbelief. The town's single remaining diner hung a small note near the register. For Erin. At the sheriff's substation, a clerk printed the updated file. The date of closure read the 11th of May 2024. Detective Grant stood in the evidence room again, looking at the sealed boxes. He didn't feel triumph, not exactly. He felt relief, the kind that comes from keeping a promise you didn't make, but inherited. He signed the closure report, then paused at the comments section. He wrote only one line. "Evidence speaks, even when we stop listening." The case returned to the evening news one final time. Reporters replayed the black and white photograph of Erin Morales, smiling in her waitress uniform. They spoke of DNA, genealogy, perseverance. They showed a modern map of Ranlow Hills, now unrecognizable from the sleepy streets of 1984. The story lasted 3 minutes on air. Then it ended, replaced by new headlines. But for those who remembered the retired detectives, the aging neighbors, and a daughter who had grown up never knowing the breakthrough, felt like a door opening after decades of silence. Technology had reached backward and pulled the past into focus. What had been dust and paperwork became proof. And proof, however late, was a kind of mercy. Once the arrest was made, the case shifted from mystery to proof. Detective Grant and Captain Ruiz traveled to Reno to interview David Keller under recorded conditions. He was calm, polite, and tired. His lawyer answered most questions, but one comment stayed with Grant. "I always thought they'd forgotten her. Guess I was wrong." The district attorney's office filed charges based on the DNA match and corroborating work records from the summer of 1984. Keller had been a refrigeration contractor for Marcy's Diner, a detail buried in an old tax record that no one had reviewed until now. That single paper trail closed the loop between the lab evidence and the suspect's presence at the scene. Investigators built the rest of the case quietly, no press conferences, no leaks. They reconstructed movements, cross-checked delivery routes, confirmed that Keller had left California within months of the crime. Every step was supported by documents, not speculation. When they were done, the binder of evidence was thicker than the original case file had ever been. The trial itself was brief. The defense argued contamination and memory loss. The jury saw science and consistency. Within a week, a verdict arrived. Guilty on all counts. The court's final statement was simple. Case closed after 40 years. The news reached Sofia Morales in Seattle, where she lived with her own family now. She read the headline twice, then sat at the kitchen table, silent. Her husband asked if she felt better. She said, "It's not better, it's finished." A month later, she returned to Ranlow Hills for the first time in decades. The town looked smaller, flatter. The old diner had become a bakery painted pale blue. Out back, near the chain-link fence, a single plaque had been placed by the local historical society. In memory of Erin Morales, 1955, 1984. Justice found. Sophia stood there at dusk, the valley wind moving through dry grass. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "We found you," and left a small bouquet from her mother's favorite flowers, white carnations. Detective Grant retired that same year. He kept the Morales file framed on his office wall, the closing report marked in red ink. When asked in an interview what kept him going on old cases, he said, "Because somebody always keeps a light on. Sometimes that's all the clue you need." A month after the conviction, the lab sent Grant a final note. In the envelope that had once held the apron, they had found a single-thread blue polyester, different from the diner uniform, older, handmade. It matched no clothing found in Keller's possession. It wasn't his. Grant read the report, smiled faintly, and filed it away. There would always be something the evidence didn't explain, a question the past refused to answer. But this time, that mystery didn't matter. The promise had been kept.